He claimed I was too old to be desired, then I got invited to the gala he couldn't enter. Women your age should be grateful anyone still wants them. The words sliced through the restaurant's pleasant atmosphere like a blade through silk. Conversations at nearby tables stuttered to silence. Forks paused midair. Eyes turned toward us, some curious, others pitying. I sat across from Daniel, my hands folded carefully in my lap, watching his handsome face twist with irritation. We'd been arguing quietly about his spending habits, but apparently quietly wasn't his style anymore. I mean, let's be realistic, Margaret, he continued, his voice carrying across the room. You're 52. You should be thanking me for even being here. Heat flooded my cheeks. Not from embarrassment alone, but from the sudden, sharp recognition of a mistake I'd spent 6 months making. I'd loved this man. Trusted him. Believed his sweet words about finding me beautiful, about age being just a number. Excuse me, I whispered, standing carefully. My legs felt unsteady, but I walked to the restroom with my head high, feeling every eye on my back. Inside, I gripped the marble sink and stared at my reflection. 52. As if that number defined my worth. When I returned, I grabbed my purse. Daniel was on his phone, laughing. I paused behind him, unseen. Yeah, she's loaded emotionally, not financially. Trust me, I've checked. The drive home was silent. Daniel didn't apologize. He turned on the radio and hummed along, as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't just humiliated me in front of strangers. As if his phone conversation hadn't revealed exactly what I was to him. An emotional piggy bank. Nothing more. I pulled into my modest townhouse driveway and cut the engine. Daniel finally looked at me, his expression softening into what I now recognized as calculated remorse. Baby, you know I didn't mean it like that, he said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. I was stressed about work. You know how I get. I know exactly how you get, I said quietly. He spent the night at his apartment. I spent it staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past 6 months. Meeting him at the art gallery opening. His charm. His attention. The way he'd made me feel seen after 3 years of loneliness following my divorce. But also the small things I'd ignored. How he always ordered the most expensive wine when I was paying. How he'd moved the conversation to my finances within our first 3 dates. How he'd never once offered to split a bill. The next morning, my doorbell rang at 9. Daniel stood there with roses, wearing his most apologetic smile. I was an idiot, he said. Forgive me? I let him in because I wasn't ready to make the break yet. Not because I believed him, but because I needed to understand exactly who I'd been sleeping beside for half a year. Daniel placed the roses on my kitchen counter and pulled me into a hug that felt more possessive than comforting. You're just so sensitive sometimes, Margaret. I wish you'd develop a thicker skin. There it was. The shift. The apology that blamed the victim. Maybe if you weren't so boring lately, I wouldn't get frustrated, he continued, pulling back to look at me. When's the last time we did something fun? Something exciting? We went to the symphony last week, I said evenly. Exactly. The symphony. He rolled his eyes. I'm 38, babe. I need energy. Adventure. Not this. He gestured around my comfortable, carefully decorated home as if it were a prison. What do you want, Daniel? I want the woman I met 6 months ago. The one who wasn't so uptight about money and plans and age. He said the last word like it tasted bitter. I nodded slowly. I see. He kissed my forehead and left for work. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by roses I hadn't asked for, and something inside me finally clicked into place. That evening, I offered to take him to dinner at a new steakhouse. When the bill came, Daniel reached for his wallet with a flourish, and his credit card was declined. Then the second one. Declined. That's weird, he muttered, his neck reddening. Must be a technical issue. I paid with cash. On the drive home, he was unusually quiet. The following weekend, Daniel insisted we join his friends at a rooftop bar downtown. I'd met them before, loud, young professionals who made me feel like someone's mother at a college party. 2 drinks in, the conversation turned to relationships. Daniel, emboldened by whiskey, leaned back in his chair with a grin. "You know what I've learned," he announced. "Older women are just more grateful. They don't expect as much. They're just happy someone's paying attention." His friends laughed. One woman, a blonde in her 20s, raised her glass. "Oh my God, Daniel. You can't just say that." "Why not?" "It's true." He squeezed my shoulder. "Right, babe? You know you hit the jackpot with me." I smiled. Actually smiled. Because in that moment, I saw him completely. The mask had fallen away, and what remained was a parasite in expensive cologne. "Excuse me," I said, standing. "I need some air." Outside on the rooftop terrace, I pulled out my phone. I'd been ignoring a message all evening. Now I opened it. It was from a friend request on social media. I scrolled through the profile, and froze. It was a dating app screenshot. Daniel's profile. Active. Current. Bio, successful entrepreneur looking for someone who can fund my dreams. Age is just a number, but a healthy bank account isn't. I stared at the city lights, feeling something cold and sharp settle into my chest. Not heartbreak anymore. Something harder. Something useful. I drove home alone that night, claiming a headache. Daniel barely noticed, too busy holding court with his admirers. I sat in my bathroom, staring at my reflection in the soft lighting. 52 years old. Crow's feet around my eyes. Gray threading through my dark hair despite the color treatments. Skin that had lost the elasticity of youth. But also, strong. Alive. Experienced. I thought about who I really was. Who I'd been before I'd met Daniel. Before I'd decided to play at being ordinary, to see if anyone could love me for myself rather than my last name. Margaret Reynolds. Sole heiress to Reynolds Properties, a real estate empire spanning 4 states. Net worth in the hundreds of millions. I'd stepped away from public life after my divorce, wanting peace. Wanting authenticity. I'd gotten Daniel instead. My phone buzzed. A text from him, "Sorry you weren't feeling well. Love you." I started typing a response. "I forgive you. Let's talk tomorrow." My finger hovered over send. Then I deleted it. Every word. If Daniel wanted to play games, I'd show him how the real players operated. The following Tuesday, Daniel asked to use my home office to finish some work. I agreed, then went grocery shopping. When I returned 2 hours later, I tidied up, and found a folder on the desk. My folder. The one I kept locked in my filing cabinet. Inside were printouts of my bank statements. The ones from my simple checking account, the one I used for everyday expenses. Someone had been through them, highlighting deposits and withdrawals. But there was more. A handwritten note in Daniel's scrawl, potential joint account equals access? My hands didn't shake as I photographed everything. I replaced the folder exactly as I'd found it and locked the cabinet again. Daniel never knew I'd discovered his little investigation. That evening, he kissed me hello and asked what was for dinner, as if he hadn't spent his afternoon plotting to rob me. "I was thinking pasta," I said calmly. "Perfect. You know, babe, I've been thinking." He settled onto the couch, looking earnest. "We've been together 6 months now. Maybe it's time we talked about combining finances. You know, like real couples do." If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like this story and also hit the subscribe button to get notified of our new series. "That's a big step," I said carefully. "We're practically living together anyway. It just makes sense." He smiled. Unless you don't trust me? Of course I trust you, I lied smoothly. Let me think about it. His smile widened. That's my girl. Over the next week, something strange happened. Friends stopped calling. Coffee dates were cancelled. When I finally reached out to my friend Pauline, her voice was cool. Margaret, I don't want to get involved in your personal issues. What personal issues? Daniel told us you've been really unstable lately. Paranoid. Accusing him of things. She paused. He's worried about you. We all are. My grip tightened on the phone. Pauline, I haven't accused him of anything. That's exactly what someone in denial would say. Her voice softened with pity. Maybe you should talk to someone. A professional. She hung up. I sat in stunned silence, understanding dawning. Daniel wasn't just stealing my money. He was stealing my credibility. Isolating me. Making me seem unstable so that when I finally figured out his game, no one would believe me. Classic gaslighting. But he'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated exactly how far I was willing to go. That night, I checked his jacket before putting it in the closet. In the inner pocket, I found a hotel receipt. The Garrison. Presidential suite. 2 nights. Last weekend, when he'd claimed to be at a work conference. A weekend stay for 2. I confronted him the next evening, calmly, over dinner. I placed the receipt on the table between our plates. Who was she? I asked quietly. Daniel glanced at the receipt, and I watched him make calculations behind his eyes. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. You're serious right now? You're going through my pockets? Who was she? A client, if you must know. We had business meetings. In the presidential suite? His expression shifted, turning cold. You know what your problem is, Margaret? You're insecure. It's exhausting. He leaned back, studying me like I was a disappointing purchase. If you were 20 years younger, maybe I'd stay loyal. But you're not, are you? The words should have hurt. A month ago, they would have destroyed me. Now, I simply nodded. I hope you enjoyed your weekend. Something in my tone made his smile falter. Just slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing at all. I stood, clearing my plate. Nothing at all. From that moment, I became a different person around Daniel. Polite. Distant. Observant. I stopped arguing. Stopped crying. Stopped reacting to his barbs and manipulations. He thought he'd broken me. I could see it in the satisfied way he moved through my home, already acting like he owned it. But while he gloated, I made one phone call. To my lawyer and family advisor, Vincent Wexler. Vincent, it's Margaret. I need you to reactivate the trust accounts. A pause. You're ready to come back? Not publicly. Not yet. But I need access to everything. And I need my identity sealed until I say otherwise. Consider it done. Daniel came home that evening complaining about his day. I made sympathetic noises and served him wine. He never noticed the shift. He was too busy counting his future chickens. I spent the next week observing Daniel like a scientist studying a specimen. I catalogued his lies. Tracked his spending. Noted the calls he took in other rooms, the texts he angled away from me. I also made some calls of my own. To investigators. To financial analysts. To people who specialized in uncovering secrets. Vincent met me at a downtown cafe one afternoon while Daniel was at work. You were right to investigate, he said, sliding a folder across the table. He's in debt up to his eyeballs. 3 credit cards maxed out. A car lease he can't afford. And he's been living beyond his means for years. Who usually pays his debts? Vincent's expression was grim. That's where it gets interesting. He showed me more files. Daniel's previous relationships. Always with older women. Always ending when their money ran out. Keep digging, I told him. I want to know everything. That evening, Daniel tried to access my bank account online. I'd set up alerts. The notification came through while we were watching television. He was in my office, trying to transfer $5,000. I walked in quietly. Daniel? He jumped, closing the laptop quickly. Hey, babe. Just checking my email. On my computer? Mine died. Battery issues. He smiled. I was actually going to ask you something. I need to borrow some money. Just temporarily. Cash flow problem. How much? 5,000? I pretended to consider. That's a lot, Daniel. I know, but I'm good for it. You know I am. I smiled. Let me think about it. His jaw tightened. But then he exploded. Think about it? After everything I've done for you? You'd be nothing without me. Alone. No one else would even look at you. The mask was completely off now. And I just smiled. You're right. Let me transfer it now. I opened my laptop and made a show of transferring money, while actually canceling all his access to my accounts. The next morning, I had breakfast with Lydia Hartwell, an old family friend I'd lost touch with over the past year. Daniel had encouraged the distance, claiming Lydia was judgmental and negative. Now, sitting across from her in an elegant brunch spot downtown, I understood why he'd wanted her gone. Lydia was powerful. She ran one of the largest investment firms in the state and had connections everywhere. Nothing escaped her notice. Margaret, I've been worried about you, she said, her sharp blue eyes studying me. You disappeared. I know. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just tell me what's happening. I told her everything. When I finished, Lydia sat back with a knowing expression. He's done this before, she said quietly. Twice that I know of. My blood ran cold. What? She pulled out her phone and showed me articles. 2 women. One in her 40s who declared bankruptcy after a relationship with Daniel. Another, mid-50s, who disappeared from public life entirely after accusing him of financial abuse. The first woman couldn't prove anything. The second was too traumatized to fight. Lydia met my eyes. But you're different, aren't you? Yes, I said. I am. Lydia smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Then let's finish his routine for him. I started keeping a journal of everything. Every lie. Every manipulation. Every attempt to access my money or isolate me further. The evidence piled up like snow before an avalanche. Daniel, meanwhile, grew more desperate. His credit cards were maxed out. His investors, if he'd ever really had any, were nowhere to be found. His lifestyle was collapsing, and he needed my resources to maintain it. One evening, we had our worst fight yet. He tried to withdraw money from an account I'd closed. When the transaction failed, he came home furious. What did you do? He shouted. Why can't I access the account? What account? I asked calmly. Don't play stupid. The joint account. We don't have a joint account, Daniel. His face went purple. You paranoid, he caught himself, but the rage remained. You're trying to control me. That's what this is. You're threatened by my success. I looked at him with an eerie calm I'd perfected over weeks of practice. I'm not threatened by anything anymore. Something in my tone unsettled him. Why aren't you afraid anymore? I smiled slightly. Because I finally remembered who I am. The answer clearly disturbed him, but he didn't know why. He didn't know that I'd stopped being Margaret the lonely divorcee and remembered I was Margaret Reynolds, a woman who built empires while men like him played at business. Through Vincent and Lydia's connections, I discovered that Daniel worked for a mid-sized development firm called North Point Properties. They were struggling financially, on the verge of bankruptcy, desperately seeking investment. I made a call to one of my shell companies, Emmer Holdings. Within a week, Emmer Holdings had purchased North Point Properties. The sale was quiet, handled by lawyers and intermediaries. Daniel had no idea his new boss was his girlfriend. He came home that evening in a panic. Some rich woman bought the company, he ranted, pacing my living room. They're doing restructuring. Cutting costs. Firing people like me who actually know what they're doing. That's terrible, I said sympathetically. Did they say who bought it? Some mysterious investor. Emmer Holdings. Probably some bored heiress playing at business. He sneered. These people have no idea what they're doing. I hid my smile behind my wine glass. I'm sure they know exactly what they're doing. That night, Daniel's work email pinged. He opened it at my kitchen table, and I watched his face go pale. What's wrong? I asked innocently. Nothing. Just, they want to review my contract. His hands shook slightly. They're reviewing everyone's contracts. The email was from Emmer Holdings' legal department. I'd written it myself. The next phase of Daniel's unraveling began organically. One of his ex-girlfriends, a woman named Heather, posted on social media about her experience with a charming con artist who targeted older women. She didn't name Daniel. She didn't have to. The details were specific enough that anyone who knew him would recognize the story. The post went viral locally. Within days, the second woman came forward. Then a third I didn't even know about. A local investigative reporter started digging. And Daniel's phone wouldn't stop ringing. This is insane, he said, scrolling through his social media. These women are lying. They're bitter exes trying to ruin me. Why would they lie? I asked carefully. Because I dumped them. Because they couldn't handle being with a successful man. His desperation was palpable. You believe me, don't you, Margaret? I looked at him for a long moment. Of course. But that evening, when the reporter called my number, I answered. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like this story and also hit the subscribe button to get notified of our new series. Ms. Reynolds, the reporter asked. I'm calling about Daniel Torres. I understand you're in a relationship with him? I said carefully. We're reassessing things. Would you be willing to speak on record about your experience? Not yet, I said. But soon. Very soon. 2 weeks later, an invitation arrived in the mail. Embossed cardstock, elegant calligraphy. The annual Hartwell Foundation Charity Gala. It was one of the most exclusive events in the state, attended by politicians, business leaders, and old money families. I hadn't been invited to this event in 3 years. Not since I'd stepped away from public life. Lydia had clearly pulled strings. I showed the invitation to Daniel casually. Look what came today. His eyes widened with greedy interest. The Hartwell Gala? That's huge. How did you get invited? Old connections, I said vaguely. Would you like to go with me? Are you serious? Yes. This could be incredible for networking. His mind was already spinning. I need to rent a tux. You'll need a decent dress. Nothing too. He gestured at my comfortable sweater. You know. I'll make sure I look presentable, I said dryly. Over the next week, Daniel threw himself into preparation. He bought an expensive tuxedo he couldn't afford. Got his hair styled. Practiced his elevator pitch for the important people he'd meet. He never thought to confirm his own invitation. The night before the gala, I called the event coordinator. This is Margaret Reynolds. I need to make a change to my RSVP. Of course, Ms. Reynolds. What do you need? I'll be attending alone. Please remove the +1 from my reservation. There was a pause. And should we add Mr. Torres to the wait list? No, I said calmly. That won't be necessary. The night of the gala arrived. I told Daniel to meet me at the venue. I had errands to run first. In truth, I had an appointment at the city's most exclusive salon. Hair. Makeup. The works. Then I went home and opened my closet. Not the closet Daniel knew about, but the locked one in my bedroom's hidden storage space. Inside hung gowns I hadn't worn in years. Designer pieces. Red carpet quality. I chose a floor-length silver gown that caught the light like water. Elegant. Powerful. Timeless. When I arrived at the Hartwell Foundation Gala in my private car, Daniel was at the entrance, looking confused and increasingly agitated. I watched from inside the vehicle as he argued with security. I'm on the list. Daniel Torres. Check again. The security guard checked his tablet. I'm sorry, sir. You're not on tonight's guest list. That's impossible. My girlfriend invited me. Margaret, she should be here somewhere. Call her. Sir, if you're not on the list, I can't allow you entry. I waited until he'd pulled out his phone, frantically calling me. Then I stepped out of the car. The cameras were already flashing. Apparently Lydia had tipped off the society photographers. I walked past Daniel, who was still on his phone, his back to me. The silver gown shimmered under the venue lights. My hair was styled in an elegant updo. I looked every inch the heiress I'd been born to be. Ms. Reynolds. A photographer called. Over here. Daniel turned at my name. Our eyes met across the red carpet. I watched his face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then slowly, horrifyingly, recognition. Margaret? His voice cracked. What is this? I didn't answer. I simply walked past him, toward the entrance where the governor's wife stood greeting guests. Margaret. Daniel called, trying to follow. Security blocked him. Sir, you need to step back. That's my girlfriend. Margaret. Tell them. I paused at the entrance, looking back at him with cool detachment. Then I continued inside without a word. The ballroom was stunning. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, champagne fountains. I accepted a glass from a passing waiter and began circulating through the crowd. People I hadn't seen in 3 years greeted me warmly. Margaret. You're back. We've missed you at these events. How have you been? I was in conversation with a state senator when a journalist approached. Young woman, eager eyes, recording device in hand. Ms. Reynolds, thank you for coming tonight. Can I ask a few questions? Of course. Emmer Holdings has been making some significant acquisitions lately. Can you confirm the rumors that you're planning expansion into commercial development? I smiled. Emmer Holdings always looks for strategic opportunities. We recently acquired North Point Properties, which will allow us to expand into several new markets. The journalist scribbled notes. And will you be taking a more public role in your companies going forward? That remains to be seen. But I'm certainly not hiding anymore. Outside, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Daniel. Still arguing with security. Still shouting my name. Still believing he had any power here at all. The scene outside devolved quickly. Daniel, realizing he couldn't get past security, began shouting loud enough that guests inside turned to look. Margaret Reynolds. You can't do this. I know who you are now. The irony was delicious. He thought discovering my identity gave him leverage. He didn't understand that it was the final nail in his coffin. A photographer captured him shouting, face red, being restrained by 2 security guards. That photo would be everywhere by morning. Inside, Lydia found me by the champagne fountain. You're handling this beautifully. He made it easy, I said. All I had to do was stop hiding and let him crash into the truth. The reporter from Channel 7 wants an interview. Are you ready? I took a breath. Yes. I think I am. The interview took place in a quiet alcove. The reporter, a sharp woman named Karen Mitchell, got straight to it. Ms. Reynolds, there are allegations circulating about a man named Daniel Torres. We have confirmed reports that he's been involved in financial manipulation of several women. Can you comment on your relationship with him? Daniel and I were in a relationship, I said calmly. He pursued me when I was living quietly under my mother's maiden name. He believed I was an ordinary woman of modest means. He was attentive, charming, and very interested in my finances. You're saying he targeted you for your money? I'm saying he targeted who he thought I was, a lonely, middle-aged woman he could manipulate. I met the camera directly. What he didn't know was that I could afford much better attorneys than he could afford lies. By the next morning, everything had exploded. The photo of Daniel being escorted from the gala went viral. The interview aired on the evening news. The investigative piece connected him to 3 other women who'd filed complaints. His world was burning down, and I'd barely lifted a finger. I'd simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own actions. Vincent called me at 9 a.m. Margaret, we've received documentation from the prosecutor's office. They're building a case against Daniel for fraud, theft, and financial elder abuse. Elder abuse? I'm 52, not 70. The law considers anyone over 50 in a vulnerable position to be protected under certain statutes. Given his pattern of targeting women in your age group, they're applying those protections. What do we need to do? Testify. Along with the other women. And there's something else. He paused. His assets have been frozen. All of them. Bank accounts, car, credit cards. Everything. I felt no satisfaction in his suffering. Only a cold, clinical sense of justice being served. Daniel's attempts to contact me grew more desperate. Texts. Calls. Emails. Finally, he showed up at my house. I watched through the security camera as he pounded on the door. Margaret. Please. We need to talk. I made mistakes, okay? I know that now. But you can't destroy my entire life. You can't. I picked up my phone and called Vincent. He's at my house. I'll send someone to serve the restraining order. Don't engage with him. But before the process server arrived, Daniel made one final play. He called the police, claiming I'd stolen from him, manipulated him, used my wealth to trap him. The officers who arrived were professional and skeptical. They took his statement, then came to my door. I invited them in, offered them coffee, and calmly showed them the documentation. The bank records proving he'd attempted to access my accounts. The photographs of his dating profile. The testimony from his previous victims. One officer shook his head. Ma'am, I think you're the victim here, not him. I know, I said quietly. That's what the courts will determine. The legal proceedings moved faster than I expected. Daniel's public meltdown had damaged him beyond repair. Companies dropped him. His landlord evicted him. Friends vanished. Heather, his first victim, reached out to me directly. I never thought I'd see justice for what he did, she said when we met for coffee. I lost everything. My savings. My confidence. I blamed myself for years. It wasn't your fault, I told her firmly. He's a predator. Predators are skilled at what they do. How did you stay so strong? So strategic? I considered the question. I had resources he didn't know about. But more than that, I refused to let him define my worth. He called me old, undesirable, useless. And I decided to prove that everything he believed about women like us was a lie. She smiled, tears in her eyes. You're my hero. No, I said gently. We're our own heroes. All of us who survived him. The court date arrived 3 months after the gala. Daniel looked diminished in his cheap suit, a public defender at his side. His accounts were frozen, his credit destroyed, his reputation in ashes. The charges: fraud, attempted theft, financial abuse, harassment. The evidence was overwhelming. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, I stood. "Your Honor, Daniel Torres pursued me under false pretenses. He made me believe he cared about me while systematically attempting to rob me. He gaslit me, isolated me, and when those tactics failed, he tried to destroy my reputation." I paused. But his greatest mistake was underestimating who I am. Not because of my wealth, but because of my strength. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in prison and ordered restitution to all his victims. As they led him away, Daniel looked back at me one last time. Not with love. Not with remorse. With pure, impotent rage. I felt nothing but relief. In the aftermath, I did something Daniel never expected. I didn't retreat back into hiding. Instead, I stepped fully back into my role as Margaret Reynolds. I took over active management of my holdings. Expanded into 3 new markets. Hired women exclusively for my executive team, women who'd overcome adversity, who understood that power wasn't about control but about lifting others up. And I started a foundation. The Reynolds Foundation for Women's Financial Independence. It provided legal aid, financial counseling, and support for women recovering from financial abuse. Heather became the foundation's first director. 6 months after Daniel's sentencing, I received a letter from one of his other victims, a woman named Patricia. "Dear Ms. Reynolds, I never thought I'd recover from what Daniel did to me. I lost my business, my home, and nearly my life. But seeing you stand up to him gave me the courage to rebuild. I'm writing to thank you and to tell you that I've started my own consulting firm. Small, but it's mine. You taught me that we don't have to accept other people's judgments of our worth." I cried reading that letter. Not from sadness, but from the profound recognition that my pain had been transformed into someone else's hope. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like this story and also hit the subscribe button to get notified of our new series. 1 year after the gala, I attended a smaller charity event. Walking in alone no longer felt lonely. It felt powerful. A young journalist approached me. "Ms. Reynolds, you've become something of an icon for women over 50. How does that feel?" "Unexpected," I admitted. "But meaningful. For too long, society has told women that aging diminishes their value. That we should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention we receive. I'm living proof that's a lie. Do you have any regrets about how everything unfolded with Daniel Torres?" I considered carefully. I regret trusting him initially. But I don't regret how I handled his betrayal. I stayed strategic, stayed calm, and let the truth speak for itself. That's not revenge. That's justice. And your advice for other women facing similar situations? Document everything. Trust your instincts. And remember that you are not defined by someone else's inability to see your worth. I smiled. Also, hire a really good lawyer. The article ran the next week under the headline, "The Woman Who Turned Heartbreak into a Movement." My phone rang constantly after that. Interview requests. Speaking invitations. Women sharing their stories. I accepted some. Declined others. But I never again hid who I was. Daniel was released after 18 months for good behavior. I heard through Vincent that he'd moved to another state, changed his name, and was working construction. A part of me wondered if he'd learned anything. If prison had taught him that people weren't resources to exploit. Then Vincent forwarded me an alert. Daniel, under his new name, had created a dating profile. On a site specifically for wealthy older women seeking companionship. Some people never change. They just find new hunting grounds. I forwarded the information to the FBI's fraud division, along with documentation of his pattern. They opened an investigation. I also warned the women support networks I'd become connected with. His photo was circulated with a warning, "Known predator, be cautious. That was the last time I thought about Daniel Torres. He'd taken enough of my energy. The rest of my life was mine to build. 2 years after the gala, I was invited to speak at the Women of Power Gala, hosted by Lydia's Foundation. The same type of exclusive event that Daniel had been so desperate to attend. I stood backstage, adjusting my gown, deep emerald this time, and thinking about how much had changed. 2 years ago, I'd been hiding from the world, pretending to be someone small and invisible because I believed that's what would bring me authentic love. Now I stood in my full power, understanding that authenticity meant embracing all of who I was, not hiding it. Lydia found me backstage. Nervous? Surprisingly, no. I smiled. I think I've been preparing for this speech my whole life. When my name was called, I walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The ballroom was filled with powerful women, CEOs, politicians, artists, philanthropists. Women who'd built empires and broken barriers. Women who understood that age wasn't a limitation. It was an advantage. I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, and began. 2 years ago, a man told me I should be grateful anyone wanted me. He said women my age were past their prime, past their usefulness, past their worth. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. And for a moment, just a moment, I believed him. The room was absolutely silent. But then I remembered something crucial. I remembered who I was before the world told me who I should be. I remembered my strength, my intelligence, my power. And I decided that his opinion of me didn't define my reality. I told them my story. Not for sympathy, but to illustrate a point. We live in a culture that treats women like expiring products. As if we have a shelf life. As if the lines on our faces represent decline rather than wisdom earned through living. But here's what I learned through my experience, I continued, my voice gaining strength. Every year I age, I become more myself. More certain. More powerful. The confidence that comes with 50+ years of living is worth more than any youthful insecurity. The audience began nodding, murmuring agreement. Daniel Torres thought he could exploit my supposed desperation. He thought older women were easy targets because we'd been conditioned to feel invisible. And yes, he did fool me initially. But not because I was old or desperate, because he was a skilled liar, and even the smartest among us can be deceived by someone determined to deceive. I gripped the podium, making eye contact with women throughout the room. The difference between my 20s and my 50s? In my 20s, I might have blamed myself entirely. I might have stayed silent, absorbed the shame, and believed his narrative about my worthlessness. But at 52, I had the resources, emotional, intellectual, and yes, financial, to fight back. And I did. Applause began to ripple through the audience. So when someone tells you you're too old to be desired, too old to be relevant, too old to be powerful, understand that they're revealing their own limitations, not yours. They're intimidated by what you've become through decades of surviving, learning, and evolving. The applause grew louder. Several women stood. Never let anyone convince you that your worth fades with age. True beauty isn't about smooth skin or bright eyes. It's about the calm after betrayal. The strength after heartbreak. The wisdom to turn pain into purpose. By now, the entire room was on its feet. He said I was too old to be desired, I concluded, my voice clear and strong. The truth is, I was just too wise to be deceived. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Women approached me afterward, sharing their own stories. Some had faced similar predators. Others had simply battled a culture that told them aging made them irrelevant. You gave me my power back, one woman said, tears streaming down her face. She was in her 60s, elegant and composed. My husband left me for a younger woman, and I've spent 3 years believing I was replaceable. But I'm not. None of us are. No, I agreed. We're not replaceable. We're irreplaceable. Lydia hosted a small dinner after the gala. Just close friends, the kind of intimate gathering I'd once avoided. We talked late into the night about our lives, our challenges, our victories. You know what I love about this group? Patricia, the woman I'd helped establish her consulting firm, said. We're all over 45. Every one of us has been told we're past our prime at some point. And look at us. Running companies. Changing laws. Raising millions for charity. Thriving. To women who refuse to disappear, Lydia raised her glass. We all raised ours. To women who refuse to disappear. I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not just contentment, but joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus, my nephew who managed one of my properties. Aunt Margaret, just saw your speech online. You're trending. Hashtag too wise to be deceived. You're officially a movement. I smiled and set the phone down. A movement. Who would have thought that my private humiliation would become a public rallying cry? But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps pain only truly served a purpose when we transformed it into something that could light the way for others. 3 years after Daniel Torres walked into my life, I stood in my living room, the same room where he'd once made me feel small, and looked at the woman I'd become. 55 now. More gray in my hair. More lines around my eyes. And more powerful than I'd ever been at 25. The foundation had helped over 200 women rebuild their lives after financial abuse. Emmer Holdings was expanding internationally. I'd reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I was dating occasionally, but on my terms, with eyes wide open. And Daniel? He was a footnote. A cautionary tale. A reminder of what happens when predators mistake wisdom for weakness. My phone rang. Another interview request, this one from a major morning show. I answered. This is Margaret Reynolds.